Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by White Stallion Ranch and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. Hey, are you a fan of Sheriff Walt Longmire and gang? If so, then you're a fan of Craig Johnson, best-selling author of the Longmire series. Craig is here to talk with the Cowboys about his writing career and life in Ucross, Wyoming. Take a guess at the population.
Well, Alan, good morning. How are you?
Well, I'm just glad to be here as usual, and it's always a pleasure to drive out to your ranch and put on my Levi's and boots and be a part of right here.
Perfect. Well, you have a little more time maybe than I do to read Western literature, and are you like me, a Walt Longmire fan?
Oh, I've just read everything I can get my hands on with Longmire, and I'm a huge fan, so I'm just thrilled to have Craig Johnson on today.
And did you watch the whole Netflix series?
Oh yeah. So I'm hooked on all of this, so I'm thrilled to have Craig Johnson on this morning.
Well, it's definitely our lucky day. It's joining us is Craig Johnson. He's the New York Times best-selling author of the Longmire mysteries, and I will speak to the fact that we meet people from all over the world, and they like to talk about what they're watching. And Yellowstone's big, Longmire's huge. It's really interesting, and I mean they're both contemporary westerns, and it's amazing the reach that shows like that have had. And anyway, the basis, Craig Johnson's books were the basis for the hit Netflix original series, and it's just simply called Longmire. Along the way, he received a Western Writers of America Spur Award for fiction. I think you have one of those, don't you, Al?
I forgot if I did.
I think you did. And his novella, Spirit of Steamboat, was the first one-book Wyoming selection. His most recent book is Hellenbach, the 18th book in the Longmire series. And Craig lives in the thriving metropolis of Ucross, Wyoming, population 26. It's great to have you here, Craig. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. We'll see how you guys feel about it here in about a half hour. Your opinion might change by then, like that. But it's a marvelous opportunity for me, like that. And you got to be careful though, like as far as like slipping on the Levi's there. You also have to mention Wrangler in there too, like that. So just for good cowboy advertising there, you want to cover all the bases.
That's for sure. Well, I only wear Wranglers, so you're onto something right there.
I used to, but then the legs got, one of two things happened. Either their legs got too thin or my legs got too fat. One of the things happened here, so I end up wearing the Levi's just because they're the only thing that'll fit over my legs anymore, like that. But I'm an equal opportunity enterpriser here as far as mentioning them.
Yeah.
Are you at home in Ucross right now?
I am. I am sitting here in my kitchen, like that, and the crown jewel of the UCLA area, that would be Ucross, Claremont, Leiter, and Arvada. And if you combine them all together like that, you'd have about, not quite 300 people like it in our northern central section of Wyoming up here on the Montana border next to the Bighorn Mountains. I was just trying to remember like that. What's the population of Tucson anyway? What is it? Because you would think I would know because I've done the Tucson Book Festival so many times like it. But what is the population of Tucson?
We're up close to 500,000 now, I think, aren't we? Or have we run past that?
Yeah, it's those numbers are always strange because I think we're over half, and the metropolitan area, so to speak, over 1 million now.
So there are more people in Tucson than there are in the state of Wyoming. That is basically the gist here. Like I just wanted to get that across.
That's nothing to brag about.
Well, it's interesting you say that because most of our family's in Wyoming. We're the outcasts that came south. and almost anybody named True in our family lives in Wyoming. And I make that comparison to our guests. I say, Tucson's got more people than Wyoming. So
it does. Like, we had a daughter, like, I actually went to school there in Tucson. So every time we come down and do the book festival, we have to get some university swag, and mail it off to her and everything. So
sure.
I have to admit, quite honestly, and I'm not just saying this just simply because it's you guys and everything. The Tucson Book Festival is absolutely one of the most remarkable and wonderful book festivals in the world. I mean, the books have been translated into a number of languages, and I get an opportunity to tour overseas, and certainly anywhere here in the U.S. And one of my absolute favorites has to be the Tucson Book Festival, because it has a little bit of a kind of a Western kind of feel to it, which I think an awful lot of the other book festivals don't. And so we love coming down there more than anything else in the world. It's an easy sell to my wife in March, I got to tell you.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Well, Lynn, we see that made this all happen is deeply involved in the Tucson Festival of Books, and I want to give her a pat on the back because she does a great job, and she's why we're talking right now. So good on you, Lynn. Well, how did you get into writing? Talk to us a little about your writing.
I came from a family of storytellers. It's just I was the worst one. And so, hold on just a second. I'll have somebody grab that. For me, it was kind of interesting like that because I, like I said, came from a family of storytellers like that. And then I was the worst one. Hold on just a second. Oh, okay. Anyway, I was the worst one. And so I thought, okay, well, if I can't tell stories, maybe what I can do is write them. And so, I made a conscientious effort, to try and learn how to write. And over the years, was constantly attempting to do it. But, wanting to be a writer in many ways is kind of like wanting to be an astronaut. The odds against you are so great, you should just keep your mouth shut and not tell anybody. Mm-hmm. And then, miracle of miracles, if it happens, then, it happens overnight like that, even though you've been working at it for 30 years. And so that's kind of what happened. I had this one idea. It was about a sheriff that simply because at the time that I started writing The Cold Dish, the very first Walt Longmire book, what had happened was everything that was in crime fiction was all, kind of noir. It was all big cities, alcoholic detectives burying bodies in their backyards and that type of thing. And so I thought, well, what if you had, something different? What if you had something like the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state? Wouldn't that be something that would be very different, from what it is that, I'm seeing in a lot of the bookshelves nowadays? And so I opted for that. And, in many ways, that's what you got to kind of try and do. If you want to have any kind of hopes of possibly being published, it seems like. To try and do something different from what everybody else is doing at that point in time. And so that kind of set the path, for Walt Longmire.
So you created Longmire and then that developed your career, really, huh?
It kind of did. I wrote that first book as a standalone book. It really wasn't supposed to be a series or anything. And Viking Penguin, I got picked up by a big agent in New York who handed me over to Viking Penguin like that. And they are the ones that sat me down and said, we really like this place. We really like these characters. Is there any way you'd think about maybe writing some more of these? And, that's when my response, to one of the biggest publishers in the world was, yeah, no, I don't think that'll work. I don't think that's a good idea. But I've got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you. And they said, maybe you should go back to your ranch in Wyoming and think about this. And so one of the things I thought about is the fact that whenever I finished that first book, it was kind of like a mass death. A lot of authors go through that. They work on a book. I'd worked on that book, for 10 years before it was ever going to get published. And so I really got to know those characters extraordinarily well. The first draft of The Cold Dish was about 650 pages long. It was like War and Peace in Absaroka County. And, I had to cut it down to get it published but it also, was kind of like a mass death in the sense that I had known those characters so well for so long, and then suddenly they were gone. And there was no opportunity for them in the future or anything for them in the future. And it was very depressing in many ways. You know, I mean, I was here on the ranch, like, and I'd be working and, you know, kind of depressed, and I'd try and figure out what was wrong. And it dawned on me that it was these characters, that I missed these characters, like, and I was going to have to, you know, seriously think about this. And so then I thought, well, why don't you try, like, that writing, you know, some more, you know, novels, you know, with these characters, as long as you've got stories to tell, like that. I mean, that's the important part. And, that was like 18 books ago. And I haven't looked back yet. I've got a big, huge file folder of all these newspaper articles that I base, you know, all of the Longmire novels off of, like that. And, haven't ever looked back, and probably won't. Like, I'm gonna run out of time before I run out of ideas, I think is what's gonna happen.
So you really didn't know that your main horse to ride was your character, Longmire. You were focused on the story and discovered that Longmire was the star. Is that how it really worked?
Yeah, it really kind of is. Like, and you know, and I think that, you know, some of the things that, you know, really worked, you know, for that character and for the series of books is that, I mean, you know, there's always these dark aspects, you know, obviously to, you know, noir crime fiction and everything. And so I was kind of like rooting for a different kind of character, you know, and so Walt, you know, is kind of a little bit of a throwback, to, you know, these characters maybe from the past. You know, there's a decency, you know, and a civility to him that I think, you know, kind of works. It's also, you know, a kind of a calculated effort too, in the sense that, like, these are contemporary Westerns. These take place, you know, in the modern day. And so I think that there's a connection, you know, that an audience, a reading audience and a viewing audience, can make. And, it's a little bit more accessible, you know, maybe than a period Western, can sometimes be. And, you know, and then this ensemble, you know, of characters, you know, that's always going to be a key element, you know, to any kind of a series. I mean, it always is going to come down to the characters. If you like the characters, if you enjoy the characters, then you'll follow the series, like, and you'll actually, you know, not only does it make it easier to read, but also makes it easier to write too.
And since you said you've got this stash of newspaper articles, and so you have plenty of material. Are they, I think I understood your episodes are based on them, loosely, I imagine. And then B, are they contemporary articles, and you've got enough local crime to write all these stories?
Amazingly enough, we do. Look at, you know, it's pretty well, you know, I mean, I everywhere I go, look at, I'm on tour a lot like that because I enjoy, you know, doing events, like at library events, bookstore events, touring, all of those type of things, you know, literary festivals, you know, like the one in Tucson there. And, you know, for me, it's, you know, enjoyable, like, in the sense that, like, everywhere I go, I pick up newspapers, you know, that have, you know, stories like that about, you know, sheriff stories, like that, things that, you know, sheriffs might be involved in. And what that does is kind of guard against, what I tend to refer to as grocery store checkout books, you know, with the chrome embossed letters, like a, you know, I don't know how many times I'll read a book, or I'll see a TV show or a movie or something that's supposed to take place in our part of the world, and I'm always looking at it and going, there's no way that would ever happen in Wyoming. There's no way. Like, and so for me, you know, to dig those up, like, and try and find issues, you know, that, you know, Walt would actually be dealing with, that's kind of a challenge. Like, but, you know, then again, I've always said, you know, I don't ever want to write a book where Walt is on a cruise ship. I don't ever want to have Walt chasing Al-Qaeda in Crook County or, you know, something stupid. You know, I want him dealing with the things that Western sheriffs deal with. And those newspaper articles make a lot of that, you know, really possible, because they're a touchstone to the reality. I mean, the last two books have, you know, kind of dealt with murdered, missing Indigenous women, which is, you know, kind of, you know, starting to now get a little bit of visibility, and is one of the scourge of, you know, of Indian country, like where it is that I live. And those are important. Those are important to be able to kind of like open people's eyes to issues, you know, from our part of the world, which might be neglected or overlooked, you know, in a lot of other places.
Well, as somebody who watched every single episode, and sometimes I have to confess, my wife and I put in some hours, and sometimes we love Longmire. We'd come home and we'd fall asleep, and it wasn't a reflection of the story. It was a reflection of the hours. And So we'd have to rewatch it because we didn't want to miss it.
Well, were you just out of curiosity? Were you watching them on Netflix? Is that what you were doing?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I think Netflix is kind of like drug dealers, like in many ways, like that, because they'll show you an episode and then they'll say, "Hey, the next episode is up in 30 seconds," kind of intimating that you really don't have anything better to do in your life than to go ahead and stay in the chair and watch another episode.
You're right.
I've discovered that there are a number of people who will like blow through like 8 episodes of Longmire in one sitting, like that, which is always nice, like that. I mean,
I don't know if we ever made 8,
about it
but
like that because we had, Warner Brothers was the producing entity, like that, and then after we left A&E and came to Netflix, like that, for the 3 final seasons of the television show, that was like 7 years ago, like that, and we're still one of the top 20 shows. Just last night, we were one of the top 20 shows on Netflix, like that, and it's interesting, like that, because I mean, I think that probably Warner Brothers and Netflix kind of thought, okay, we'll run this little Indian and cowboy show like that, but it'll run for another year or so, and then it'll start dropping in the ratings, and we'll just go ahead and replace it or get rid of it. Well, that was 7 years ago, and we're still chugging along, which
how can you attribute
which is very
that?
nice. I think it speaks very well to the producers and the directors and the actors and everybody that was involved with the television show.
Or maybe the writing.
Well,
that's for you to say, and maybe not so much for me, like that. But thank you, I appreciate that.
I'll tell you from my perspective, one of the things I think, it's Robert Taylor, right, and Lou Diamond Phillips, and I never liked Lou Diamond Phillips. I thought he was an arrogant actor who just couldn't keep it hidden, and he was spectacular in that show. And the casino owner, whose real name escapes me, they were fantastic.
Hey, Martinez.
Yes,
he played
yes.
Jacob Nighthorse. Yes.
The characters were fantastic, and the guy who used to be in the detective show, I can't think of his name, but he was the bad guy who ends up dead on Longmire's porch. But what I think was such a great thing about that show is that it was very fair and very within television, very real. And you talked about missing Indigenous women. It dealt, I think, and you tell me, I think it was very fairly and openly, communicated the challenges to the reservation, the interaction to the outsiders to the reservation, and it was just, I think, people went away. Plus, Longmire's ethics and his whole moral code, and I think I'm proud that it represented the West as I see it.
I agree.
Very
I agree.
well.
There's an awful lot of stuff that's on nowadays that I'm a little embarrassed by, because I'm always like, people around the world are going to see this and they think that we actually behave this way. And so, for me, to know that there's an ethical and a moral kind of core, certainly to that main character, but there was also a strength in the ambiguity, I think, than the way that they did the television show, that maybe the bad guys aren't so completely bad, maybe the good guys aren't so completely good, and played in that gray area. That's maybe a little bit more realistic. It isn't all black and white hats. Sometimes there's a lot of gray hats out there. And, I think that helped us a great deal. I do think, though, that, you're right. So many of the performances, in the show were just absolutely spectacular. I mean, we certainly could not have been able to do Longmire without Longmire. And I think that Robert Taylor's performance, as that character, is so multidimensional, and so nuanced. And he's just such a straight ahead good guy. I mean, he's very, very much, like Walt Longmire. They have an awful lot in common. I mean, he's really kind of a blue collar working class actor who takes, things very seriously, but has a great sense of humor, and the work ethic that's just, hard to believe. And then, you're mentioning of Lou Diamond Phillips. I just, came back from the Heritage Museum and the Cowboy Hall of Fame, in Oklahoma City, where they had an induction for Lou, into the Hall of Fame, and he's just, one of the most remarkable individuals you could ever possibly want to meet. I mean, he's a spectacular performer, but also just an incredibly decent human being. And just to give you a quick idea, of what kind of a person he is, I actually wrote the commencement speech for the Northern Cheyenne High School, the Lame Deer Morning Stars. And they asked me to write this commencement speech, and I wrote it for them. And then they told me when the date was that it was supposed to be given. And I was on a book tour. There was no way that I could possibly do it. I was overseas, and so I explained to them that I couldn't do it. And I was down on set in New Mexico where they were filming near Santa Fe. And Lou came up to me, and the first thing Lou would always ask is, "What's going on the res?" And I said, "Well, I wrote this commencement speech for the Morning Stars, Northern Cheyenne High School." And I said, "I'm not going to be able to do it." He didn't even pause for an instant. He goes, "When is it?" And on his own dime, he flew to Billings, Montana, jumped in a rental car, paid for it, drove down to Lame Deer, and delivered that speech for me. They had the highest turnout of any commencement speech.
I'll bet they did.
At Morning Star High School that they'd ever had. There were actually students that stayed in school to graduate from high school because Lou Diamond Phillips was going to be delivering that commencement speech. And that just kind of gives you an indication of what kind of a guy he is.
Well, that's a great story.
Well, he revealed that in that show. I like I said, that show is how involved did you because we've talked to authors and some of them have had their books made into some TV shows or movies. Sometimes they have some involvement, sometimes they don't. Did you get any hand in the casting or producing?
Far too much.
Tell us a little. I'd love to hear this.
It was kind of an odd thing because, like you, I had discussed this with a number of writers, who had television shows and motion pictures and things done. And so, basically the statement that they made to me was, they will sign you a check give you the check, and then you'll never hear from these people again. You might even recognize it when it gets on the screen, and then again, you may not. And so I was kind of prepared for that. But the producers that we had, were extraordinarily interested in making sure that, that this show was, it reflected, the place where it was supposed to take place, because if it didn't, then everything else, would fail, miraculously And, so they really wanted things to be right. And I think in that sense, it was a money saving opportunity for them, because they could either hire somebody who knew about sheriffing, somebody who knew about Wyoming, someone who knew about the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow tribes, and knew the history of these characters, all this kind of thing, or they could just kind of keep me on the payroll, which they did. And one of the ways that they did that is they actually shipped me the DVDs of all of the actors that they were thinking of in all of the roles. And I still remember, when that FedEx package, they kept arriving from Warner Brothers, where they would, send me the DVDs of all the actors they were considering, and then say, make us a list, from your top pick all the way down to your last pick, and let us know what you think.
Did they respect your wishes on that? Did they respect your wishes on that?
They actually did. I don't think that I was the turning point that got them, to come around on a lot of this. Fortunately, what happened was the producers and I generally agreed, pretty much, all the way down the line, on all the characters. I don't think we had any, major disagreements, along those lines, other than the initial meeting where I had with them, and they said, we're thinking about making Walt and Henry 10 years younger than they are in the books. And I, of course, had the, redneck cowboy author response where I was like, well, now why are we doing that? And they said, well, because we'd like the TV show to run for about 10 years, and we'd rather not have Walt and Henry on walkers, by the time we get to the end of the run. And so I had a hard time arguing that point. So I just kind of kept my mouth shut and realized that they might know what it is that they were doing.
Right. Well, we got to take a break. We've gone way over, and we'll come right back to that. Thank you, Craig. We'll be right back to that thought.
Okay.
Thank you, Russell, Alan, and Craig. The cowboy stories just keep on coming. And thank you for listening to the Cowboy Up podcast, and we're grateful for your recommendations and your support. And you can help us in another way. Now, you're a very special person, but It also appears that there are thousands of other very special persons all around the world who are enjoying this program, and we would like to make you an offer. Just as somebody, particularly our friends in the horseshoe business and the DRA and White Stallion Ranch, step forward and say, we would like to have our message on the program, and we also want to help sponsor this fine program. Maybe you'd like to join them, and we would be grateful for that. And if you'd like to have your shout out, your promotion, your product and service who can serve these people who are listening, we would be grateful to give you that opportunity. So reach out to Lynn, and she'll give you all the details. Just write this down, thecowboyuppodcast@gmail.com, thecowboyuppodcast@gmail.com, and just simply say, Lynn, I'd like to be part of the promotional team of the Cowboy Up Podcast, and we'll tell you just how you can do just that. And now, back to the program.
Well, I'm sorry, I kind of stopped you. You were talking about casting and the beginnings of the show.
Yeah, it was kind of surprising like that, but yeah, the casting that the producers did and the casting that I did were remarkably similar. Okay, the strength of the auditions that we had were amazing. We had a lot of opportunities because I think what the producers were shooting for was trying to get people who were very, very good, but also maybe not so well known. There were a lot of really big name actors, that tried out, for the role of Walt Longmire like that. And, you guys know as well as I do that, generally if there's a character with a cowboy hat, generally there are about a half a dozen actors, in Hollywood that tend to get that role. And they're all wonderful performers, but, for my money, they've kind of gone to the well one time too many. And, you don't really see them as a character anymore. You see them as kind of this, conglomeration of all of these cowboy roles that they've played like that. And so the great thing about Robert Taylor is that, he did have a background and he did have, a lot of wonderful roles that he had done, was a veteran like that. But then again, he also had it was a little bit of a new face. Like it was something a little bit different, which was kind of wonderful as far as that's concerned. But as far as the casting and a lot of the other elements of the television show, what I've learned is that, you got to remember that I had, I think, 7 books out, I think at that point in time when Warner Brothers came and approached me about a TV show. And, I'd made it on the New York Times bestsellers list, but I had 7 books. So I was not huge. I was no John Grisham. I was no Stephen King or anything like that. And so I think, I did the best thing that I could, which was try and judge if the people that were doing this, were going to be really good at it. What kind of track record did they have? And the producers that did the show had remarkable track records of shows that they had done. So in many ways, Hollywood's a little bit like ranching. You try and hire the best people that you can get and then do the hardest thing in the world. Leave them alone. Let them do what it is that they do, and not try and micromanage it.
Well, I think it's
certainly for me, it turned out very well.
I think it's interesting what you just said. I'm sure one of your short list of cowboy hat wearing actors might be Robert Duvall or any of those guys, Sam Elliott. The pretty short list. And you're right. It might be hard for people to see past the compilation or whatever word you used of their past roles. And
oh yeah.
So Robert Taylor was.
There's always going to be signature roles, for a lot, especially for Western actors, like that in many ways. I was laughing about it like that because my co-presenter that did the introduction, with me for Lou Diamond Phillips, like at the Hall of Fame, like that, it was actually Wyatt McCrae. Who is the living legacy of Joel McCrae, like that. And I remember whenever the producers asked me, they said, "Well, do you ever think about actors when you think about Walt Longmire?" And I was like, "No, I don't. I've got real sheriffs that I know and people that I know, like that, and I tend to base my characters off of real people." And they said, "Well, if you were to think about any actors that would play Walt Longmire, who would it be?" And I said, Gary Cooper, Ben Johnson. Joel McRae would be a good wall. Well, their response to that was, Craig, those guys have all been dead for 50 years, and there's not going to be much help. And so they kind of had to, go off on their own and try and do the job themselves at that point.
How about Walt?
Have you become friends in person with any of the main characters?
Yeah, you know what? Pretty much all of them. As a matter of fact, it's been kind of interesting like that. But I kind of hit it off with all of them, and they're all pretty wonderful like that. And a lot of times I can get them to come and do events with me. Sometimes I think a couple of times I've had them down there. The entire cast, at the Tucson Festival of Books, and a number of other literary events. And then of course we do have this thing called Longmire Days. That we have up here in Buffalo, Wyoming every summer, where we invite all of the cast members to come to this little town of 4,000 people, Buffalo, Wyoming, along with about 20,000 of their closest friends. And it's kind of like a FEMA disaster, because it's, I remember the first year that we did it, all the grocery stores and all of the restaurants ran out of food, all of the banks and the ATM machines ran out of money, and everybody was walking around with their cell phones in the air trying to get service from the one little tower that we have in Buffalo, and they had completely melted it down, for goodness sake, and so it was very interesting, but also extraordinary because here are thousands and thousands of people coming to see all these people are in this TV show that really invest in these characters in this place. And they're really remarkable. They're really wonderful, wonderful people. I kind of laugh about it because every week after Longmire Days, which is, I think I can say pretty safely, is one of the biggest events, in Wyoming, the sheriff and the chief of police for Buffalo and Johnson County, respectively, would get together and do how much crime had there, been in town, even with, close to, 15, 20,000 extra people in town that weekend. And it's so funny because there's never any extra criminal activity. And I was laughing about it when I was talking to the sheriff one day, and I was like, it's not Sturgis.
I was just going to say it's not Sturgis.
Yeah, their favorite character is a sheriff, so they're probably relatively law-abiding people, so it's
great friends of ours have a dude ranch out there, Paradise. You guys end up over there, don't you? Paradise Ranch.
We do. We try and take advantage of as many of the dude ranches and as many of the locales as we possibly can. We've got the TA Ranch, the south of town, which is an area where, we're very, very big in the Johnson County cattle wars. We've got
Famous
Paradise,
ranch.
we've got HF Bar, we've got Eaton's.
Yeah.
We have all of these marvelous places like that we can, work into, the events, whenever we can. And, I don't know, it's kind of nice for the actors too, because, for 6 years they were in New Mexico pretending to be in Wyoming. And so it was kind of nice to bring them all up here and let them see what the real Wyoming is like.
Yeah, and it's funny, when we first started watching the show, I know just enough about filming to know that, of course, New Mexico is a huge mecca for filming because of the incentives, and Arizona just passed one, so maybe we'll steal a bit of that back, but because, of course, Arizona was huge for filming once upon a time. But
yes, with old Tucson and all of the locales that you guys have across Arizona. Yeah. But yeah, definitely New Mexico got the jump on everybody.
Yeah.
But I think Richardson, was the governor there.
It was Bill Richardson who did it.
Yeah, and he decided early on, he was like, they're going to be looking for other places to film. Maybe we can kind of help out with that. And so not only is it the financial incentives, but also, they have the Santa Fe School of Art and Design, where they have sound stages. They have sound stages. They have crews. They have all these technical people that they have right there in New Mexico. They don't have to fly people out from Los Angeles and put them up and feed them and and pay them overtime. And they can actually use local folks to do that But yeah, a lot of the state legislatures for a lot of Western states are trying their best to play catch up.
Well, Netflix, as you probably know, bought that Albuquerque soundstage complex and had to pledge to the state that they would do $1 billion a year in production value for 10 years.
I never heard that.
Yeah, this is all.
And that's some serious money. I mean, that goes back to the old, political phrase, well, $1 million here and $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking about serious money. So.
Yeah, no, it's really amazing. Well, yeah, did they film ever in Wyoming, or was it all New Mexico? I could ID that it was New Mexico. It was still
they did
beautiful
a couple of background shots, here in Wyoming, because it was funny. Even in the pilot episode, I had to laugh like that because there's the part where Lou Diamond Phillips, waves at Robert Taylor as he drives by in the Bronco, and then they do a response shot where they look and they see Lou, looking after the Bronco, but over Lou's shoulder, you could literally see the outline of the Bighorn Mountains. You saw you could see Cloud Peak, you could see Bomber Mountain. It was the Bighorn Mountains. And what they had done was, of course, movie magic, they had superimposed those mountains behind the city of Las Vegas, New Mexico. And it was so funny like that because I had all these people from Wyoming, writing me emails and calling me up and going, where's that town in Wyoming? I mean, I can see it's the Bighorns in the background, but where's that town? And I'm like, well, that's just a little bit of movie magic.
So the town was, and you pronounce it Absaroka. Is that right?
Mm-hmm, I do.
Because, I know guys up there that call it Absaroka. And so it was a fictional.
Yeah, there's about 5 different pronunciations for the word itself.
Exactly.
Which is it's actually the Crow word for the Crow tribe. And Absaroki, Absaroka, Absarka. There are about 5 different pronunciations for it. And so the reason I went with the one that I did was, a couple of different reasons. First of all, I wanted it to be unique. And not really, be pinpointable, if that's a word,
sure.
For, people to be able to find exactly where it is that would be. The other one was I was talking to a good friend of mine, Marcus Red Thunder, up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. I said, hey, I think I'm going to do this fictitious county, and I think I'm going to call it Absaroka County. And there was a pause, and he goes, is it mostly white people in this county? And I said, yeah, it is. And he said, well, then they would mispronounce it and call it Absaroka. And I was like, well, there it is. So that was how the county got its name.
And did I understand that it was filmed in Las Vegas, New Mexico?
It was. The
know
town square, and a lot of the architecture. I think that town was built about the same period in time that Buffalo and Sheridan, Wyoming were built, because there's striking similarities to the architecture involved and it seemed to have worked out very well. Of course, the other thing is that, the shooting schedule they have for the TV show was about 4 or 5 months. So they would actually start filming at the end of February. Anybody, obviously, since you guys have family members here in Wyoming, you know what the weather is like, at the end of February here in Wyoming. And so unless you wanted the TV show to look like it was being filmed in Nome, Alaska, probably they were going to have to look a little bit south.
Yeah.
To find, some steady weather patterns that they could utilize.
Some pine trees without snow on them.
Exactly.
So I saw your video and the Bighorns stayed in your mind and brought you back. Am I getting that right?
Now, what is it now?
Your video on your website talked about the Bighorn Mountains and a place in your life that they brought you back to. Wyoming.
Oh, absolutely. That's home, in many ways. I have to walk softly because I don't want to give too many things away. But what's really kind of wonderful about the place where I live is that generally the common populace is in such a hurry to get from the Black Hills over to Yellowstone that they just drive right over the Bighorn Mountains and don't pay any attention to it. Well, it's an absolutely spectacular mountain range, with 14,000-foot peaks. And, a wilderness area that's about the size of Rhode Island, for goodness sake, where, there are no roads and there is no conveniences like electricity or anything like that. I mean, if you want to go in to the Cloud Peak Wilderness area, you have to go buy leather. And that's either hiking boots or saddle leather. That's the only things that you can go in there with. And it kind of is a little bit of a throwback. We've got lodges up there, but, they're a little bit more rustic, which is kind of wonderful. And then there just aren't the crowds. There aren't those huge amounts of people that you tend to see in both the Black Hills and certainly in Yellowstone, where there are the large buses and buses and buses, full of people. And, and anything you're going to see, you're going to have to stand in line, for a couple of hours to see. And it's kind of nice to have that hidden part of the world
It's my favorite part of Wyoming. Sheridan's my favorite town, and I love Wyoming. So it is.
And I've got like a little cabin that's up there that was built in 1896. I've got tucked away, in the Bighorn National Forest, and so whenever the traffic in Ucross with all 26 of us when we're out driving around gets to be too much for me, I can always disappear up into the mountains, for a day or two.
Well, we talk about your new book.
Yes.
Before we run out of time. Hell and back.
Well, this has been such a joy. But yeah, the next book will be out in September, I think on the 5th. And it's called The Longmire Defense is the title. And it's based off of a storyline that came right out of the newspapers right here in Johnson County. Somebody found a rifle up in the Bighorns, up in the mountains up there, just kind of tucked away in some rocks, where it was out of the weather, mostly, and had been left there, and so it got my mind to thinking, it was kind of just the thing that lit the fire as far as the storyline is concerned. But what happens in this particular story is that the title actually comes from Walt's relationship with his grandfather, which everybody knows is not a good relationship. Those two kind of tended to butt heads, when Walt was younger. But he is the one that taught Walt how to play chess, how to see ahead, how to look forward, and anticipate the things that are happening. And so one of the things they used against each other was the Longmire Defense, which was a particular chess move. And in this particular novel, what happens is Walt's on a search and rescue up in the Bighorn Mountains, and to find this woman and he does find her, and then has to borrow her cell phone because he doesn't have one, and go up on a rock outcropping and see if he can get reception. And so he goes up on this rock outcropping and calls in, tells them which trailhead that they'll be coming out. And there he can find them. And as he's looking around, he's thinking to himself, I have been here before. I have been on this rock outcropping sometime, in my past, and remembers that he actually was there with his father, years and years ago, when he was a youngster. And his father told him the story. He said, have I ever told you about the first time I ever saw a man killed? And, Walt as a young man says, no, you haven't. And so his father goes on to tell him the story about this man by the name of Bill Sutherland, who was the state accountant for the state of Wyoming. Had come home from the war in 1948, as after the war, and wanted to clear his head by going up in the mountain and going elk hunting, and so, Walt's father and grandfather invite him to come up to their elk camp, and he's up there. Well, the problem is one of the tragic aspects of the book is that he's killed. And they think it's an accident, but nobody can really be sure because the caliber of weapon that was used was a Weatherby 300 H&H Magnum, which was a kind of a prototypical weapon at that period in time. Nobody had, that weapon. And as Walt's thinking about all of this, he sees this dog is down underneath there digging in the rocks, and he tells the dog to get away from there before a marmot comes out and bites his nose off. Well, the dog raises his head up, and there's a leather strap in his mouth. And that could either be a piece of horse tack, or it's possible it could be a rifle sling. And so Walt climbs down off the rocks and reaches down in there and pulls out a Weatherby 300 H&H Magnum. And I like to think of Walt as being one of the most ecumenical, innocent until proven guilty detectives that there is, until he discovers that this weapon actually belonged to his grandfather, Lloyd Longmire. And it kind of sets Walt on a very different kind of investigation than we've seen before.
That's a cool story. I love to hear you tell that.
And that's out.
Well, thank you. It's an even better read, I promise. Okay.
And that's out when, Craig?
That'll be out on September 5th. And I will be out and on the road. I can guarantee you I'll be in Arizona. No two ways about it.
Well, we wish you'd come visit with us at White Stallion or any of wherever you are in Arizona. We have somewhere you could come stay at a dude ranch.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And Hell and Back was the book just before, and so people can pre-order the Longmire Defense, I assume.
Absolutely. It's available for pre-order now. And then the two previous books were Hell and Back, and the one before that, Daughter of the Morning Star.
And of course, they're all out. And of course, the Netflix show was in the top 20 lately. So that just keeps selling books and keeps that modern Western good, fair story alive.
I like to think so. I'd like to think that there's a, like I was saying, like the two words I tend to use is civility and a decency, like that. I don't know. It seems like, in the modern era, you have to defend those things a little bit more like that because there's a lot of indecency like that and incivility like that. And I think we're all a little bit better off if we treat each other a little nicer.
Well, an understatement. And, Bob Bosbell, the True West publisher, all-around guru, one time
I know
spoke.
Bob well.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. And not too long ago talked about how Westerns had morphed to where the bad guys were the heroes. And, it's good to, as you said, maybe it's nuanced, but I think it's still pretty clear who's the good guys. And, it's just, it's a story that makes the West proud. And we thank you for it.
Yeah,
my pleasure. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the show.
You're really a great guest to have on the show. We're proud to be able to talk to you.
We'll do it all again when the new book comes out. You give it a read. Like you owe me about a 3,000-word book report. Okay, each of you.
Well, we're looking forward to it. And your website was good. Remind us of the site name, the domain.
Absolutely. My website is CraigAllenJohnson.com. CraigAllenJohnson.com. Like that. And there's videos on there, like there's information about the books, information, and even a contact. If people want to write me an email, I'm always laughing about it because my emails always start off with whoever it is that answers Mr. Johnson's emails, and I'm always standing there here at the ranch looking at the computer and going, that would be me.
Well, thank you again. CraigAllenJohnson.com.
Thanks, Craig.
My pleasure, guys.
Yeah.
Families and dude ranches, that's what people think of when they think of dude ranches. And of course, White Stallion Ranch is no different. Outdoor activities, there's all kinds of things to do together. Horseback riding, rock climbing, archery, shooting, hiking, tennis, basketball, horseshoes, swimming pool, hot tub. I don't know if you do spa services together, but we've got those. And of course, the game room with all those games and evening entertainment. Families really get together and enjoy that. But one of the great experiences is giving the kids a bit of independence. And you can't really absorb that until you experience it. And watching your kid run off with a bunch of other kids to go off on a ride without you, or playing games after dinner, or going, hey, Mom, Dad, we're heading over to the game room, see you at dinner. It's just not too many places you get to do that. And people my age, we had a bit of history with that, but the world today, it's a bit different. I think most importantly, the families leave with that memory of really truly experiencing a vacation, and a pretty varied vacation, all together and with all those experiences shared. Sometimes together, most of the time together, but not always, and everybody finding something they really enjoy. So, whitestallion.com, all the information. The website's pretty extensive, and you can call 888-977-2624, or most easily, whitestallion.com.
Alan, I don't know if you watched it. Craig has a 3-minute video on. He's got more than one video, but on his website, it was, and he said something that I've said several times about Wyoming, because of course we have the family connection there, and if we were a little tougher and a little smarter, we'd be in Wyoming probably. But anyway, I said, if you're in Wyoming, you really want to be there, And he has that quote there. He's talking
Really?
about the sparsity of population, and how it gives it a very stable and real sense of community. And I thought, I've been up there a lot, and I've experienced it. Our family, who I have nothing but respect for it, they just exemplify it. And you know what? Go to Wyoming if you haven't. In that area where he was talking about, Eaton's, the original ranch, he mentioned them. H.F. Barr, second oldest, Paradise, they're in the Bighorns.
Well, it's clear his background in Wyoming comes through when you interview him. He's Wyoming through and through.
Yeah. No, I think that's what makes the show the hit it is.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap from beautiful Arizona and Ucross, Wyoming, population 26. A Western shout out to Stan Houston and his production team. Tune in next week when singer-songwriter David Rickner saddles up to the ranch, guitar in hand. In the meantime, let us know what you'd like to hear, who you'd like to meet, and hey, what you're up to. Our email is thecowboyuppodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, this is Lynn Weezy Sneed reminding you to sit tall and ride safe.